Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for having AHPRA here today. I am going to discuss the pathways to psychology registration, which are reasonably complex. They are available on the AHPRA website and the Psychology Board of Australia website if you need to have a look at that a little bit in further detail. Just a disclaimer that the information is current as of the 16th of September, and because in the world of regulation, legislation is constantly changing and being reviewed, please don't rely on the information I'm giving you today because it could change. So always check current registration information before proceeding with your careers and your registration. We'll have a look at why psychologists are registered, the pathways, as I said, areas of practice endorsement, the registrar program, and then, if we have time, for questions. So psychologists are potentially dangerous, and you'll know that from your lecturers and your professors here. Highly dangerous, so they are. And the people that psychologists see can be vulnerable, easily exploited, at risk of harming themselves and others. And they have mental health disorders that should receive an evidence-based intervention from appropriately qualified professionals. And that's part of what AHPRA is about, and what the Australian government is about, is regulating the healthcare profession to ensure that not only the practitioners are appropriately trained, but also that those practitioners then deliver evidence-based treatments. So the best treatments we know from the research for a particular presentation. We register as psychologists also so that we can use the title psychologist. So the title psychologist is a protected title under law. No one can use that unless they have appropriate training and qualifications. And the note there is that the title is actually protected rather than the practice. So anyone can use the skills and therapeutic techniques that psychologists use. That is not regulated or protected, but the title itself of psychologist is, and there's been recent legislative change that if people are using that title that don't have appropriate qualifications and hold registration, then not only is there a large fine, but there is now a jail term that will go with that. So it's a very serious thing to use the title if you are not actually qualified and registered. Why also hold registration is most employers will require that you hold registration or that you are eligible to register. It gives you access to government-funded schemes such as Medicare, work cover. It protects the public through regulatory oversight so that there is a mechanism that will oversee the practice and behaviour of psychologists. The registration categories are: there are provisional registration, general registration, and non-practising registration. What I won't do is talk about non-practising because you're not there yet, hopefully going towards provisional registration. And I'll go through the different pathways to get through to general registration. So the basic requirements for registration are completion of an accredited 4-year sequence of study in psychology. So the psychology course here at Western Sydney and psychology courses at other universities and other organisations have 4th-year accredited programs. And that then makes you, once you have completed that, eligible for provisional registration. Similarly, if you haven't studied in Australia, you've studied overseas, qualifications that are deemed by the board as substantially equivalent. To be eligible for general registration, you need a 6-year sequence of education and training in psychology, or again, overseas qualifications that are substantially equivalent. Those overseas qualifications are assessed by the Psychology Board of Australia, and we match courses, we get translations, we talk to other regulatory bodies around the world to find out what type of training and education people have overseas. Generally, the pathways to registration are referred to as the 4+2 pathway. the 5+1 pathway and the higher degree pathway. The 4+2 pathway involves the 4th year that everyone needs, regardless of the pathway, the 4-year accredited sequence, followed by a 2-year full-time internship, or the equivalent part-time. Throughout the internship and towards the end, you sit the National Psychology exam, and you're required to submit 4 case reports to the Psychology Board of Australia for assessment, and they need to be assessed as satisfactory. You then apply for general registration once you've met all those competencies. The 5+1 pathway is the 4-year accredited sequence and then a 5th year accredited course, which is generally known as the Master of Professional Psychology, which is a 5th year at university involving placement during that 5th year, and then after that a 1-year full-time internship or part-time equivalent. Again, the National Psychology exam, 2 reports to be submitted for assessment to the board, and then apply for general registration. The higher degree pathway is the 4-year accredited sequence, followed by a master's, doctorate, or a combined master's PhD. And through that pathway, the university is responsible for overseeing the study that you'll do and the placements that you will go to. The board is there to ensure that you are provisionally registered throughout that period, but they don't regulate your placements or your university course. That's left to the university. Once you've fulfilled all the requirements, then you can apply for general registration. The 4+2 pathway in that 2 years or equivalent part-time involves 3,000 hours of overall practice, which includes 160 hours of supervision and 60 hours of professional development per year. And to qualify for general registration after that, you need to complete the internship and meet the competencies as set out by the Psychology Board, pass 4 case reports and the National Psychology exam. 5+1 pathway is your 4-year accredited sequence, followed by the 5th year Master of Professional Psychology. After that, a 1-year internship of 1,500 hours, full-time or part-time equivalent. To qualify for general registration, complete the internship, pass 2 case reports and the National Psychology exam. Some of the roles that you might consider in the 4+2 or 5+1 pathway are quite wide and varied. The Psychology Board does not provide any assistance in finding placements. That's up to you or other institutions or organisations that you might go to for assistance, but it's very rare to see jobs that are actually called provisional psychologists or intern psychologists. The roles that are there are often known as counsellor, mental health worker, drug and alcohol counsellor, clinician. Don't be put off by these. These can also be considered by the board and approved as an official internship for a psychology program. The higher degree pathway, again, only accredited degrees, and so there are some degrees that are not accredited as a pathway to psychology registration, which would include the counselling degrees that are run. They do not lead and would never lead to consideration by the board for registration as a psychologist. Again, also research-only degrees, so PhDs are not recognised by the board. The PhD in psychology is focused on the discipline of psychology rather than the practice of psychology. And registration is about the practice of psychology as opposed to the discipline. Once you've enrolled in your degree, been accepted and enrolled, you can then apply for provisional registration with the board. And once you have completed the university requirements, you can apply for general registration. The Psychology Board has just given a permanent exemption to all higher degree students for the National Psychology exam. So you won't have to sit that. And the higher degree pathway at this stage is the only pathway that qualifies for what's known as endorsement, which really is areas of specialisation. There's the fancy animation. Good, got a response, excellent. Okay, so pathways to endorsement. Registrar, a 4+2 pathway, 5+1 pathway doesn't lead to endorsement. The higher degree pathway does lead to endorsement. If this is all a little bit too much at the moment, that's okay. When you have a look at the website, when you consider which pathway you're going, it will make more sense to you. And certainly as you're coming into, say, your 4th year, you will be more interested in looking at these pathways to determine which way you're going to go. If you're looking at the higher degree pathway and endorsement, you will have done your 6 years, if it's full-time, at university. So your 4-year undergraduate and honours, and then your 2-year masters. And after that, you then apply to do what's known as the registrar program. To complete the registrar program, if you've completed a master's, you need to do 3,080 hours of supervised practice in order to apply for endorsement. If you have a combined PhD master's, it's 2,310, and if you have a doctorate in psychology, it's 1,540 hours of supervised practice. Once you have completed the registrar program, you can apply for endorsement. So why hold endorsement? The reason is the title, again, is protected. So if you wish to use the title clinical psychologist, forensic psychologist, educational and developmental psychologist, you must hold endorsement in that category to be able to use that title. The other area that you can move into is providing supervision to registrars in the area of endorsement that you have followed, such as clinical or forensic, and I'll go through the areas of endorsement for you in a moment. The other reason is that some employers actually do require endorsement, so you will see some employers advertising only for endorsed psychologists in particular areas. The areas of endorsement as they stand at the moment with the National Board are clinical neuropsychology, counselling, health, community, educational and developmental, forensic, organisational and sport and exercise. Western Sydney only run the clinical masters now. In days gone by, they used to run the forensic, very strong forensic program out of Western Sydney. So lots of forensic psychologists out there have had their training through here, and they also used to run the educational and developmental psychology. Yeah, so you can ask your the powers that be at Western Sydney why they're not running those programs any longer. And so they're the areas. Some of the areas, it's difficult to find the higher degree. You would have to move interstate to find them. Only certain universities will run these master's programs for area of practice endorsement. Maintaining your registration once you achieve it is 30 hours of continuing professional development, which includes 10 hours of peer consultation. And to maintain your recency of practice and meet the standard for psychologists, you must have practiced a minimum of 250 hours in the previous 5 years, which is approximately 6.5 weeks full time. So it's not a lot to maintain your registration and your recency. You must declare at every renewal whether you have an impairment that is likely to affect your practice. If so, you disclose it to the board, and the board will discuss that with you. It is not necessarily a barrier to practice, but it is something that you are obliged to disclose, and you must not practice without holding professional indemnity insurance. A lot of larger employers, such as New South Wales Health, Department of Education, will supply professional indemnity insurance to you when you're employed. But if you're in private practice or you're in a consultancy in other areas, you need to hold it for yourself. The National Psychology Exam is 150 questions over 3.5 hours. It's applied psychological knowledge and competency. The curriculum and reading list are on the website, and as I said, it's for 4+2, 5+1. Any overseas trained applicants, regardless of what their qualifications are recognised as, must sit the national psychology exam, and in a way that is screening to make sure that they understand local requirements, laws and systems within Australian healthcare. And also anyone that doesn't meet recency, so for example, if I take a break for 5 years and don't practice, I then apply again for general registration, I may be asked by the board to sit the exam to prove that I am actually still competent to practice psychology. Key for anyone heading towards registration is that the 4+2 pathway will be retired 30th of June 2022 is the last day that the boards will accept applicants to begin the 4+2 pathway. So it's very important to recognise that, depending on where you're at in your studies, as to whether the 4+2 pathway will be an option for you or not. Remembering you can only enter the 4+2 pathway once you have the 4-year accredited sequence completed. And the 30th of June 2027 is the last day that a person who has completed the 4+2 can apply for general registration. So there is a period there. And 1st of January 2029 is when the government, through legislation, has said that the program is officially retired. And you can see there's a little bit of a leeway there. That would be for consideration of extenuating circumstances. So it's important for you to know those dates and know that the 4+2 pathway will be retired. Can I take questions? Is that something you want me to do, or you want to make up time?
Well, you do have a table, so maybe you can tell them that you're going to be out there.
Okay, yep, there is a table, and one of the regulatory officers from AHPRA and myself will be out there, so if you have any regulatory type questions, please feel free to come up and ask us. Thank you. Do you want me to leave that here now?